Detective Ryan Johnson thought he owned the streets. After 12 years wearing the badge, he had convinced himself that the rules didn't apply to him. His patrol car rolled through the neighborhoods like he was the king of his own little kingdom, and nobody dared to challenge him. The morning sun was just breaking over the city when Ryan started his shift. He grabbed his coffee from the same diner he always visited, where the owner never charged him a dime. It wasn't because Ryan was particularly friendly or deserving. It was because people were afraid of what might happen if they didn't keep him happy. Ryan had built his reputation one traffic stop at a time. He knew exactly which neighborhoods to patrol and which people to target. His supervisor, Captain Williams, had long ago stopped reading the complaint forms that occasionally crossed his desk. After all, Ryan brought in numbers. Arrests, citations, drug busts. His statistics looked impressive on paper. What those numbers didn't show was the trail of broken trust Ryan left behind. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who ran a small grocery store, still flinched whenever she saw a police car. 6 months earlier, Ryan had stormed into her store, claiming someone had reported suspicious activity. He had torn through her neat shelves, scattered products across the floor, and left without explanation or apology. No report was ever filed. Then there was Tony Martinez, a college student who had been walking home from his part-time job at the library. Ryan had stopped him 3 times in 2 weeks, each time demanding to search his backpack, each time finding nothing, and each time making Tony late for either work or class. Tony had tried to file a complaint, but somehow the paperwork kept getting lost. The pattern was always the same. Ryan would find reasons to stop people, especially in the neighborhoods where he knew residents were less likely to have connections or resources to fight back. A broken taillight that wasn't really broken, suspicious behavior that was just someone walking to the bus stop, loud music that he claimed to hear from blocks away. His fellow officers had learned not to ask too many questions. Detective Lisa Park had once tried to speak up during a particularly aggressive arrest she witnessed. Ryan had cornered her later, reminding her that partners needed to stick together. After that, Lisa found herself getting the worst assignments whenever Ryan had influence over the schedule. The police union representative, Officer Mike Torres, had become Ryan's closest ally. Whenever a complaint did manage to make it through the system, Mike was there to argue that Ryan was just doing his job in a tough neighborhood. He would cite Ryan's arrest record, his years of service, and his dedication to keeping the streets safe. Ryan loved that protection. He would sit in the break room, feet up on the table, laughing about his latest encounters. He would describe how people scattered when they saw him coming, how they wouldn't make eye contact, how they answered his questions with yes sir and no sir, even when he hadn't followed proper procedure. But Ryan's favorite stories were about the traffic stops. He had developed a particular technique for escalating situations that started as minor violations. He would approach vehicles with his hand resting on his weapon, even for routine stops. He would demand documents with an aggressive tone that immediately put people on edge. When drivers became nervous or asked questions about why they were being stopped, Ryan would interpret their behavior as suspicious. Last month, he had pulled over a young teacher named Amy Collins who was driving home from a late parent conference. Her crime was allegedly rolling through a stop sign, though the intersection had been empty. When Amy politely asked if she could call her husband to let him know she would be late, Ryan accused her of being uncooperative. He made her sit on the curb for 30 minutes while he slowly wrote a citation, claiming he needed to run extra checks on her license. Amy's husband had arrived at the scene, worried about his wife's safety. Instead of de-escalating, Ryan had threatened to arrest them both for creating a disturbance. The citation was eventually dismissed in court, but Amy never forgot the feeling of helplessness she experienced that night. The real problem was that Ryan had become addicted to the power. Every interaction reinforced his belief that he could do whatever he wanted. When people complied with his demands, he saw it as proof that he was in control. When they questioned him, he saw it as justification to escalate further. His personal life reflected his professional attitude. Ryan's marriage had ended 3 years earlier, when his wife couldn't tolerate his increasingly aggressive behavior at home. His 2 children visited him every other weekend, but even they seemed cautious around their father. His teenage daughter had stopped bringing friends around because Ryan would interrogate them like suspects. at the local bar where off-duty officers gathered. Ryan was known for his stories about putting people in their place. He would describe confrontations in vivid detail, always casting himself as the hero who had to deal with uncooperative citizens. The newer officers listened with a mixture of admiration and unease, while the veterans quietly sipped their drinks and changed the subject. Captain Williams knew about Ryan's reputation, but the complaints never seemed to stick. Witnesses would sometimes change their stories or simply stop cooperating with internal investigations. Ryan had learned to be careful about when and where he pushed boundaries, always making sure there were no cameras around and no witnesses who couldn't be intimidated or discredited. The department's body camera policy was inconsistently enforced, and Ryan had mastered the art of technical difficulties. His camera would malfunction at convenient moments, or the audio would cut out during crucial conversations. When questioned about these issues, he would shrug and blame equipment problems. Ryan's confidence had grown to the point where he barely tried to hide his misconduct anymore. He would make jokes about his methods in front of other officers, knowing that the code of silence would protect him. He had convinced himself that he was untouchable, that his years of service and political connections within the department made him immune to consequences. What Ryan didn't realize was that times were changing. People were becoming more aware of their rights, more willing to speak up, and more likely to record interactions with police. The protective bubble he had built around himself was becoming thinner, though he was too arrogant to notice. As Ryan finished his coffee that morning and prepared for another day of patrols, he had no idea that his luck was about to run out. Somewhere in the city, someone was about to challenge his authority in a way he had never experienced before. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated, wouldn't back down, and wouldn't let his actions disappear into the system like so many others had. The streets that Ryan thought he controlled were about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. The summer heat was thick in the air when Detective Ryan Johnson spotted the silver sedan driving through downtown. It was Tuesday evening, and traffic was light as people headed home from work. Ryan had been having a slow day, and he was looking for any reason to make a stop. Dr. Rachel Kim was driving carefully, following all traffic laws as she made her way home from the courthouse. She had just finished a long day working on a civil rights case, and she was tired. Her phone was mounted on the dashboard, and she was having a video call with her colleague about the case they had been discussing all day. The call was being live-streamed to the law firm's social media account, something they did regularly to educate the public about legal issues. About 200 people were watching the stream when Dr. Kim noticed the police car pulling up behind her with its lights flashing. "Hold on," she told her colleague on the call. "I'm being pulled over. I'm not sure why." Ryan approached the vehicle with his usual aggressive swagger. He had no specific reason for the stop other than a vague claim about improper lane changing, which hadn't actually happened. He was in one of his moods where he felt like flexing his authority, and Dr. Kim's expensive car in this particular neighborhood had caught his attention. "License and registration," Ryan demanded without explanation, his hand resting on his weapon belt. Dr. Kim remained calm and professional. "Certainly, officer. May I ask what the reason for this stop is?" The question immediately irritated Ryan. In his experience, people were supposed to comply without asking questions. "Just give me your documents," he snapped. Dr. Kim carefully reached for her purse, making sure her movements were slow and visible. She was well aware that the interaction was being broadcast live, and she wanted to handle everything properly. "I'm reaching for my wallet now," she said clearly. As she handed over her license and registration, she noticed that Ryan hadn't turned on his body camera. This was a red flag, as department policy required cameras to be activated during all traffic stops. "Officer, I notice your body camera isn't recording. Department policy requires—" "Don't tell me how to do my job," Ryan interrupted, his voice rising. He was already annoyed that she had questioned the reason for the stop, and now she was trying to tell him about procedures. Dr. Kim's colleague was still on the video call, and viewers could hear everything happening. The comment section was filling up with people expressing concern about the officer's behavior. Some viewers had already started recording the live stream on their own devices. Ryan spent an unusually long time examining Dr. Kim's documents. He called in her license number and waited in his car, occasionally glancing back at her vehicle. This was one of his favorite psychological tactics, making people wait and worry about what might happen next. When he returned to her window, his attitude had become even more hostile. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Dr. Kim remained calm but firm. "Officer, what is the reason for this stop? What probable cause do you have for asking me to exit my vehicle?" The word probable cause was like a trigger for Ryan. In his mind, people who knew legal terms were troublemakers who thought they were smarter than him. "I said get out of the car, now." "I will comply with your request," Dr. Kim said clearly, "but I'm asking you to please explain the reason for this stop." "That's my right as a citizen." Ryan's face flushed red with anger. This was exactly the type of situation where he usually escalated things to show people who was in charge. But this time he didn't know that hundreds of people were watching his every move. As Dr. Kim slowly exited her vehicle with her hands visible, Ryan grabbed her arm roughly and spun her around toward the car. "You think you know better than me? You think you can question everything I do?" "Officer, you're hurting my arm," Dr. Kim said calmly. "I haven't resisted anything. I've complied with all your requests." The livestream viewers were watching in shock as Ryan pushed Dr. Kim against her car with unnecessary force. She continued to remain calm and spoke clearly so everything would be captured on the audio. "I'm not resisting," she repeated. "I'm cooperating fully. Can you please tell me what law I've violated?" Ryan was furious that she wouldn't stop asking questions. In his mind, her calm demeanor and legal knowledge were signs of disrespect. He had never encountered someone who remained so composed while he was trying to intimidate them. "You're under arrest," he announced suddenly, without specifying any charges. "For what crime?" Dr. Kim asked as Ryan roughly pulled her hands behind her back. "Resisting arrest?" Ryan said, even though she hadn't resisted anything. "How can I be resisting arrest if you haven't told me what I'm being arrested for in the first place?" Dr. Kim asked logically. This question made Ryan even angrier. He was used to people becoming emotional or scared, which gave him more reasons to escalate. Dr. Kim's calm, logical responses were frustrating his usual tactics. As he put the handcuffs on her, Ryan made several inappropriate comments about people who thought they were better than police officers. He complained loudly about how certain types of people always caused problems and never just followed simple instructions. Dr. Kim continued to document everything verbally for the benefit of the video call that was still running. "I want to note for the record that I have not resisted in any way. I have complied with all requests. I have asked reasonable questions about my rights, which is not illegal." Meanwhile, the live stream had exploded. The viewer count had jumped from 200 to over 3,000 as people shared the link across social media platforms. Comments were pouring in from viewers expressing outrage at what they were witnessing. Ryan seemed completely unaware that his behavior was being broadcast to thousands of people. He continued his aggressive behavior, making comments about how people needed to learn respect for authority. He complained about having to deal with difficult people who thought they knew the law better than he did. Dr. Kim's colleague, who was still on the video call, was furiously taking notes and trying to coordinate with other lawyers who were now watching the stream. Someone in the chat mentioned they had already called the police department to report what was happening. As Ryan walked Dr. Kim to his patrol car, she continued to speak clearly for the recording. "I'm requesting to speak with your supervisor. I'm also requesting that this interaction be properly documented with all required cameras activated." "You'll get what you get," Ryan replied dismissively. He was enjoying the feeling of power that came from controlling someone who clearly had education and status. In his mind, this was exactly the kind of person who needed to be taken down a notch. But as Ryan placed Dr. Kim in the back of his patrol car, he had no idea that his world was about to change forever. The live stream had been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. Videos of the interaction were being uploaded to social media faster than they could be counted. Phone calls were flooding into the police department from people who had witnessed the stop online. Local news stations were already being alerted by viewers who had recorded portions of the stream. The mayor's office was receiving calls from concerned citizens. Dr. Kim sat quietly in the back of the patrol car, knowing that everything had been captured and that justice would eventually be served. She had remained professional throughout the entire ordeal, and her calm responses had created a stark contrast with Ryan's aggressive and unprofessional behavior. Ryan drove toward the station, completely unaware that his career was effectively over. He thought he had just handled another routine stop with an uncooperative citizen. He had no idea that millions of people would soon know his name, his face, and exactly what kind of officer he really was. The video was already going viral, and there would be no way to cover this up, no way to make it disappear, and no way to spin the story in his favor. The truth was out there for everyone to see. Within 2 hours of Dr. Rachel Kim's arrest, the live stream video had been viewed over 500,000 times. By morning, that number had climbed to 3 million. The hashtag Justice for Daughter Kim was trending on every social media platform, and news outlets across the country were picking up the story. Captain Williams was having his morning coffee when his phone started ringing non-stop. The first call came from the mayor's office at 6 in the morning. The second was from the police chief. By the time he got to the station, reporters were already gathering outside. "What the hell happened last night?" the chief demanded as soon as Williams walked through the door. Williams had watched the video like everyone else, and his stomach had dropped when he recognized Ryan's voice and behavior. This wasn't just another complaint that could be buried in paperwork. This was public, viral, and undeniable. "I need to see all of Ryan's files immediately," the chief continued. "Every complaint, every incident report, everything." As Williams reluctantly pulled out the filing cabinet, he knew his own career was in jeopardy. He had ignored too many warning signs, dismissed too many complaints, and protected an officer who should have been fired years ago. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim had been released on her own recognizance after spending the night in jail. The charges against her had been quietly dropped, but the damage to the department's reputation was just beginning. The video had done something that years of complaints couldn't accomplish. It had given other victims the courage to speak up. By noon, the police department's phone lines were jammed with people calling to report their own experiences with Officer Ryan Johnson. Mrs. Patterson, the grocery store owner, was one of the first to call. She had watched the video and recognized the same aggressive tone Ryan had used when he had torn apart her store months earlier. She had been too afraid to file a complaint then. But seeing Dr. Kim's calm bravery had inspired her to finally speak up. Tony Martinez, the college student who had been repeatedly harassed, drove straight to the police station with his father. They brought copies of his class schedules and work time sheets, documenting how Ryan's stops had disrupted his life. Tony's father was a construction worker who had always taught his son to respect police officers. But watching that video had changed everything. Amy Collins, the teacher who had been humiliated during a routine traffic stop, called her union representative. She had tried to put the incident behind her, but the video brought back all the feelings of helplessness and anger. Her union immediately offered to support her in filing a formal complaint. By the end of the week, 17 separate complaints had been filed against Ryan. But the real bombshell came when Detective Lisa Park finally decided to break her silence. Lisa had been wrestling with her conscience ever since watching the video. She had witnessed Ryan's misconduct multiple times over the years, but had been too afraid to speak up. The viral video had shown her that silence was no longer an option. She walked into Internal Affairs with a folder full of notes she had been keeping secretly for 2 years. The notes detailed incidents she had witnessed, conversations she had overheard, and evidence she had seen Ryan manipulate or destroy. "I should have come forward sooner," she told the Internal Affairs investigator. "I was scared for my career, but watching that video made me realize that my silence made me part of the problem." Lisa's testimony opened the floodgates. She provided details about how Ryan would turn off his body camera before confrontations, how he would coach other officers on writing reports to justify excessive force, and how Captain Williams had instructed officers to lose paperwork related to complaints against Ryan. The FBI got involved when evidence surfaced that Ryan had been planting drugs during searches. Lisa had witnessed this twice, but had been threatened into silence. Now she provided detailed accounts of both incidents, including the names of other officers who had been present. Meanwhile, investigative journalists were digging deeper into Ryan's background. They discovered that Internal Affairs had received 43 complaints against Ryan over his 12-year career, but only 3 had resulted in any disciplinary action, and those were just written warnings. The journalists also uncovered financial irregularities. Ryan had been living well above his salary, driving expensive cars and taking elaborate vacations. Bank records suggested he had been receiving money from unknown sources, possibly connected to evidence tampering and drug cases. Social media played a crucial role in the investigation. Citizens who had been victims of Ryan's misconduct were connecting with each other online, sharing their stories and comparing details. They discovered patterns in his behavior that individual complaints had never revealed. A local civil rights organization created a tip line specifically for Ryan Johnson victims. The phone rang constantly with people reporting incidents going back years. Many callers had never filed official complaints because they didn't think anyone would believe them or take action. The police union tried to control the damage by releasing a statement saying that Ryan's behavior didn't represent the values of law enforcement. But then audio surfaced of union representative Mike Torres laughing about citizen complaints during a private meeting with other officers. Torres had been secretly recorded by an officer who was disgusted with the union's protection of bad cops. The recording revealed Torres bragging about how easy it was to discredit complainants and make evidence disappear. The mayor called for a complete review of the police department's policies and procedures. An independent oversight committee was formed, led by retired federal judges and civil rights attorneys. Their first action was to secure all of Ryan's files before any more evidence could be destroyed. Captain Williams was placed on administrative leave when investigators discovered he had been aware of Ryan's misconduct for years. Email records showed that Williams had received multiple warnings from other officers about Ryan's behavior, but had chosen to ignore them. The most damaging revelation came when digital forensics experts recovered body camera footage that had allegedly been corrupted. Using advanced recovery techniques, they were able to restore hours of video that clearly showed Ryan planting evidence, using excessive force, and lying in his reports. Dr. Kim became an overnight symbol of courage and dignity in the face of police misconduct. She used her platform to call for systemic reform, rather than just punishment for one officer. She appeared on national news programs, always maintaining the same calm professionalism she had shown during her arrest. "This isn't just about one bad officer," she explained in interviews. "This is about a system that protects misconduct and silences victims. Real change requires transparency, accountability, and a commitment to justice from everyone involved." The video had triggered something much bigger than anyone expected. What started as one illegal traffic stop had exposed a network of corruption that reached throughout the department. Ryan's arrest had become inevitable, but the investigation was revealing that the problem was much deeper than one rogue officer. Public pressure was mounting for criminal charges, not just internal discipline. The district attorney, who had worked closely with Ryan on many cases, now faced questions about how many convictions might have been based on planted evidence or false testimony. As the investigation expanded, it became clear that Ryan's downfall was just the beginning. The viral video had started a chain reaction that would ultimately transform the entire police department and send shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. The truth was finally coming to light, and there was no way to put it back in the darkness where it had been hidden for so many years. 3 weeks after the viral video destroyed his career, Ryan Johnson sat in a cold interrogation room facing federal agents. The man who had once intimidated countless citizens was now sweating under the bright lights, his hands shaking as FBI Special Agent Thompson placed a thick folder on the table. "Let's start with the Martinez case," Agent Thompson said calmly. "We have body camera footage showing you planting narcotics in Tony Martinez's backpack during a search last year." Ryan's lawyer, a public defender named Mr. Foster, leaned over to whisper in his client's ear. The expensive attorney Ryan had initially hired had dropped him when the evidence became overwhelming, and the retainer money ran out. The federal charges were serious: civil rights violations, evidence tampering, perjury, assault under color of authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Each charge carried years in prison, and the government had built an airtight case using the recovered digital evidence and testimony from Ryan's former colleagues. District Attorney Patricia Wells had initially hesitated to prosecute. She had worked with Ryan on hundreds of cases over the years, and his testimony had secured many convictions. But the public pressure was intense and the evidence was undeniable. More importantly, her own reputation was on the line. "The people of this city deserve justice," DA Wells announced at a press conference. "When those sworn to protect and serve violate their oath, they must face the full consequences of the law." The prosecution team had spent months building their case. They had 17 victim witnesses, hours of recovered body camera footage, financial records showing unexplained income, and testimony from other officers who had finally decided to tell the truth. Detective Lisa Park had become the prosecution's star witness. Her detailed notes and first-hand accounts provided crucial evidence about Ryan's pattern of misconduct. During her testimony, she broke down in tears as she described how fear had kept her silent for years. "I was a coward," she told the jury. "I watched him destroy people's lives, and I did nothing because I was worried about my own career. That makes me almost as guilty as he is." The trial began 6 months after the viral video. The courthouse was packed with reporters, victims, and community members who had followed every development in the case. Ryan walked into court each day wearing an ill-fitting suit, looking nothing like the confident officer who had once strutted through the neighborhoods he terrorized. Dr. Kim's testimony was devastating. The video of her arrest was played multiple times, and she calmly explained how Ryan had violated every protocol and constitutional right during their interaction. Her professional demeanor contrasted sharply with Ryan's behavior on the recording. "I remained calm because I knew the truth would eventually come out," Dr. Kim testified. "I also knew that my reaction would be judged just as much as his actions. I wanted to show that dignity and respect for the law could triumph over intimidation and abuse of power." But it was Tony Martinez's testimony that brought several jurors to tears. The young man described how Ryan's harassment had nearly caused him to drop out of college. He had been stopped so many times that he started taking different routes home from work, adding an hour to his commute just to avoid Ryan's patrol area. "I was afraid to leave my house," Tony said. "I knew he was looking for any excuse to arrest me. When he planted those drugs in my backpack, I thought my life was over. My family had worked so hard to send me to college, and this officer was willing to destroy everything just to boost his arrest numbers." The prosecution presented evidence that Ryan had planted drugs on at least 6 different people over 3 years. The recovered body camera footage showed him removing small bags from his patrol car and placing them in vehicles or on suspects during searches. Mrs. Patterson testified about the destruction of her grocery store. She described how Ryan had terrorized her customers and destroyed thousands of dollars worth of merchandise while claiming to investigate a suspicious activity report that was later discovered to be fabricated. Amy Collins, the teacher, explained how Ryan's treatment during a routine traffic stop had left her afraid of police officers. She had moved to a different school district, partly because she couldn't bear to see patrol cars in her old neighborhood. The defense tried to argue that Ryan was a dedicated officer who had made mistakes under pressure. Mr. Foster painted him as a victim of poor training and inadequate supervision, claiming that the department's culture had encouraged aggressive policing, but the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Financial experts testified that Ryan had received over $80,000 in unexplained cash deposits over 2 years, likely payments for evidence tampering or case fixing. Digital forensics specialists explained how Ryan had systematically destroyed body camera footage to cover up his crimes. Former Captain Williams, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, admitted that he had ignored dozens of complaints against Ryan. He described a culture of protecting officers at all costs, even when their behavior was clearly illegal. "I told myself I was supporting my officers," Williams testified, "but I was really just covering up crimes. I failed as a leader and I failed the community we were supposed to serve." The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the foreman stood and delivered guilty verdicts on all 23 counts. Ryan's face went pale as he heard guilty repeated again and again. Judge Anderson sentenced Ryan to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. He also ordered Ryan to pay restitution to his victims and banned him permanently from any law enforcement position. "Your actions have brought shame to the badge and violated the sacred trust between police and community," Judge Anderson said during sentencing. "You used your position of authority to terrorize innocent people, and you corrupted the justice system itself. The severity of this sentence reflects the severity of your crimes." Ryan's family sat in the back of the courtroom, his ex-wife crying quietly as their teenage children stared at the floor. His daughter had been bullied at school because of her father's notoriety, and his son had been rejected from several college programs when admissions officers recognized the family name. The civil lawsuits began immediately after the criminal conviction. Dr. Kim's Case against the city was settled for $2.3 million. Tony Martinez received $1.8 million for the planted evidence and harassment. Mrs. Patterson was awarded $400,000 for the destruction of her store and ongoing emotional trauma. In total, the city paid out over $15 million in settlements to Ryan's victims. The insurance company that covered the police department dropped their policy, citing the systemic nature of the misconduct. Property taxes had to be raised to cover the legal costs and settlements. Ryan's pension was revoked and his family lost their home when they couldn't keep up with mortgage payments. His wife had filed for divorce shortly after his arrest, taking their children and moving to another state to escape the publicity. Mike Torres, the union representative who had protected Ryan for years, was expelled from the police union and resigned from the force. An investigation revealed that he had accepted bribes to help cover up misconduct by multiple officers. 18 other officers were terminated or forced to resign during the investigation that followed Ryan's conviction. The entire Internal Affairs Division was restructured, and new policies were implemented to prevent the kind of systematic cover-up that had protected Ryan for so long. As Ryan was led away in handcuffs after his sentencing, he finally understood the true meaning of consequences. The man who had once believed he was above the law was now facing the reality that justice, though sometimes delayed, could not be permanently denied. The courtroom erupted in applause from the victims and community members who had waited years for this moment. Dr. Kim sat quietly, satisfied that the system had finally worked as it was supposed to. The viral video that had started everything had ultimately delivered exactly what it promised: real consequences for someone who thought he would never face them. 2 years after Ryan, Johnson was sentenced to federal prison. The ripple effects of his downfall continued to transform everything he had once touched. The city that had employed him, the department that had protected him, and the communities he had terrorized were all still dealing with the consequences of his actions. Ryan himself was learning harsh lessons about life without power. Federal prison was a dangerous place for former police officers, and he had been placed in protective custody for his own safety. The man who had once intimidated others now spent 22 hours a day in a small cell, afraid of his fellow inmates. His cellmate was a former accountant serving time for embezzlement. The irony wasn't lost on Ryan that he was now living alongside the type of white-collar criminals he had once arrested. The accountant, who went by Dave, had watched Ryan's viral arrest video like millions of others. "You're that cop from the video," Dave had said on Ryan's first day. "Man, you really messed up big time." Ryan's days were monotonous and filled with regret. He attended mandatory anger management classes where he was forced to confront his behavior for the first time. The counselor, Dr. Martinez, no relation to Tony Martinez, didn't show any sympathy for Ryan's former position. "You spent 12 years abusing your authority," Dr. Martinez told him during one session. "You destroyed families, planted evidence, and violated every oath you took. What exactly did you think would happen?" Ryan had no good answers. For the first time in his adult life, he was forced to consider the impact of his actions on other people. The letters from victims that his lawyer shared with him were devastating to read. Parents described how their children no longer trusted police officers. Business owners explained how his raids had destroyed their livelihoods. Meanwhile, the city was implementing sweeping police reforms that Ryan's case had made inevitable. The new police chief, Chief Johnson, who shared Ryan's last name but was no relation, had been brought in specifically to clean house and rebuild community trust. "We're not just changing policies," Chief Johnson announced at a community meeting. "We're changing the entire culture of this department. Every officer will be retrained, every procedure will be reviewed, and every complaint will be taken seriously. Body cameras were now mandatory for all officers, with severe penalties for anyone who disabled or failed to activate them. A civilian oversight board had been established with the power to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action. Officer misconduct reports were now public record, posted online for community review. Dr. Kim had used her settlement money and newfound platform to establish the Citizens Justice Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to police accountability and victim support. The foundation provided legal assistance to people who couldn't afford attorneys when dealing with police misconduct. Ryan's case showed us that change is possible, Dr. Kim said during a speaking engagement at a law school. But individual accountability is just the first step. We need systemic reform to prevent the next Ryan Johnson from operating with impunity for 12 years. The foundation had already helped dozens of victims file complaints and lawsuits against problem officers. More importantly, they had created a database of police misconduct that made it harder for bad officers to simply move to different departments when they got in trouble. Tony Martinez had finished college and was now attending law school, inspired by his experience with the justice system. His case had led to the overturning of dozens of convictions based on Ryan's planted evidence, freeing several people who had been wrongly imprisoned. "That officer tried to destroy my future," Tony said in an interview. "Instead, he helped me find my calling. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Mrs. Patterson had rebuilt her grocery store with help from community donations that poured in after her testimony at Ryan's trial. The new store was bigger and better than before, and she had become something of a local hero for her courage in speaking out. Detective Lisa Park had left the police force and was now working as an investigator for the Civilian Oversight Board. Her insider knowledge of police culture made her invaluable in identifying potential misconduct before it escalated. "I can't undo my years of silence," Lisa said, "but I can use what I learned to protect people from officers like Ryan. I know the warning signs now, and I'll never ignore them again." The police union had undergone major changes as well. Mike Torres's corruption had led to a complete leadership overhaul, and the new union president had pledged to stop defending officers who violated citizens' rights. "Our job is to protect good officers, not bad ones," the new president declared. "When we defend misconduct, we're actually hurting the vast majority of officers who do their jobs with integrity." Captain Williams had lost his pension and was working as a security guard at a shopping mall. The man who had once supervised dozens of officers was now checking receipts and watching for shoplifters. His career in law enforcement was over, and he struggled to find steady work with his damaged reputation. The federal investigation triggered by Ryan's case had expanded to other cities, leading to similar prosecutions nationwide. The Department of Justice had used Ryan's case as a model for how to investigate and prosecute police corruption, sharing their methods with prosecutors across the country. Ryan's family had tried to move on, but his notoriety followed them everywhere. His ex-wife had remarried and changed her last name, trying to give their children a fresh start. His daughter was now in college studying social work because she wanted to help repair the kind of damage her father had caused. His son had initially defended his father, but visiting him in prison had opened his eyes to the reality of Ryan's crimes. The young man was now studying criminal justice, hoping to become the kind of police officer his father should have been. "I used to think my dad was a hero," he wrote in a college application essay. "Learning the truth about his actions was devastating, but it also showed me what real heroism looks like. It's not about power or intimidation. It's about service, integrity, and protecting people who can't protect themselves." The viral video that started everything had been viewed over 50 million times and was now used in police academies across the country as an example of what not to do. Dr. Kim's calm professionalism during the arrest had become a model for how citizens should interact with police, even when officers are behaving improperly. Ryan's case had also sparked changes in how police misconduct was covered by the media. News organizations had learned to pay more attention to patterns of abuse, rather than treating each incident as an isolated event. Investigative reporting on police accountability had increased dramatically. The city where Ryan had operated was now considered a model for police reform. Departments from around the country sent representatives to study their new policies and procedures. What had started as a crisis had ultimately made the community safer and more just. As Ryan marked his second year in prison, he received a letter from Dr. Kim. She didn't forgive him, but she thanked him for inadvertently becoming a catalyst for positive change. She explained how his case had helped hundreds of other victims find justice and prevented countless future abuses. Ryan read the letter in his cell, finally understanding the full scope of what his actions had set in motion. He had thought he was untouchable, that his badge gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. Instead, his arrogance had triggered a transformation that would protect people from officers like him for generations to come. The consequences he faced were indeed unbelievable, not just for him personally, but for the entire system that had protected and enabled his misconduct. Sometimes justice comes slowly, but when it finally arrives, it can change everything. Ryan still had 10 years left on his sentence, 10 years to think about the lives he had damaged and the trust he had betrayed. But perhaps more importantly, he had become an example that proved no one is truly above the law, no matter how powerful they think they are. The badge that had once made him feel invincible had ultimately become the symbol of his downfall, reminding everyone that those who serve the public must be held to the highest standards, not the lowest.